I lay reclined on a soft, luxurious couch, meticulously embroidered with 9 majestic dragons and shimmering gold thread, resting directly in front of the bustling combat arena. The summit of Mount Tai, specifically the Grand Fengchan platform, was alive with raw energy. The once-in-a-decade martial forest assembly was currently reaching its ultimate explosive climax. Out on the stage, heavy fists stirred the roaring wind, and sharp, invisible sword chi crisscrossed violently through the air. I was an 80-year-old man now, my hair completely stark white, yet the peerless, legendary elegance of my youthful prime could still be vaguely discerned across my weathered features. I was the great Xia Imperial Dynasty's Prince of Zhenan, a recognized great grandmaster and an unassailable martial forest legend. My name was Su Yu. I let out 2 heavy, rattling coughs, my elderly chest tightening. The attentive maid standing faithfully by my side immediately and obediently handed me a small bowl of warm, steaming soup, carefully brewed from a rare, 1,000-year-old snow lotus. I took a slow, methodical sip, my ancient gaze, looking down at the massive sea of heroes gathered below with a distinct hint of weariness. I had seen it all, conquered it all. Your Highness, regarding today's fierce contest for the title of the Martial Forest Alliance leader, which young hero do you personally favor more? The head eunuch, who had been specifically sent by the current emperor to attend to me, asked respectfully from my side, bowing his head. Before I could even open my mouth to answer his political question, a sudden explosive change occurred directly on the combat arena. A previously unknown, plain-clothed youth suddenly unleashed 3 devastating moves of the domineering, unparalleled heavenly dragon True Chi. The raw shockwaves of his energy blasted the venerable head of the Shaolin Dharma Hall, the man who held the absolute highest support among the crowd to win the championship, clean off the arena stage. The entire audience instantly erupted into an absolute uproar. Over on the prestigious guest of honor seats, a still charming, fiercely beautiful female leader of the notorious demonic sect stood up abruptly. Her eyes were wide with shock as she stared fixedly at the victorious youth. Heavenly Dragon True Chi, that is the absolute signature secret technique of the Prince of Jinan, she shouted, her voice trembling. Kid, what on earth is your name? Who is your biological mother? The plain-clothed youth stood proudly in the center of the stage, his chest heaving as he answered loudly. For the entire crowd to hear, I do not change my name, nor do I alter my surname. My name is Su Fan. He paused, clearing his throat as his voice echoed across Mount Tai. My mother was the #1 courtesan of Jiangnan 20 years ago, Lu Ruyan. This supreme cultivation technique is the only intimate keepsake my father ever left behind for my mother. The moment the explanation left his lips, the youth turned his head abruptly, his sharp gaze fixed directly upon me, resting on my high platform. Then he dropped heavily onto both knees, his eyes turning bright red with unshed tears. Father, your child finally has the qualifications and the strength to stand proudly before you. I almost completely spat out the warm, expensive snow lotus soup right out of my mouth, my thick skin twitching. But before I could even wipe the wetness from my lips, another completely unexpected, staggering event occurred right before my eyes. Wait a moment. On the side belonging to the righteous path of the martial forest, the cold and immortal-like abbess Joe Ching of the Ime sect trembled violently all over, her face turning pale as she pointed a shaking finger directly at Su Fan. Did you just say you used the heavenly dragon True Chi? Didn't that heartless man say that in this entire world, only our mother and daughter knew the vital points of this cultivation technique? Standing right beside Abbess Jueching's, the highly gifted Ame Saintess, who had just fought her way into the top 4 of the tournament, was completely stunned. She turned to her mentor, her voice filled with bewilderment. Master, didn't you always tell me that I was an orphan? My father is actually the Prince of Jinan? Nonsense. The brilliant, high-ranking female imperial preceptor of the great Xia Imperial Dynasty slammed her hand heavily against the wooden table, her sharp phoenix eyes instantly filling with absolute murderous intent. Master Su talked with me all night long at the stargazing tower back then, clearly saying that I was his one true soulmate. Is the child standing at knees right now not his own flesh and blood? In an instant, the entire Fengchan platform exploded into absolute, unmitigated chaos. The aging beggar sect leader suddenly discovered that his most valued, hand-picked young sect leader was wearing a distinctive jade pendant from the prince of Zhenan's estate around his neck. The Kunlun sect leader was thoroughly horrified to learn on the spot that his own wife had actually had a passionate affair with the prince of Zhenan 20 long years ago. Even those peerless prodigies who had just spent the entire day fighting one another until they were bruised and bleeding on the arena to compete for the title of number one in the world, looked around at each other. They suddenly stopped and realized, between everyone's brows, their facial features were actually 7 or 8 parts identical. Hundreds of gazes from the entire audience, whether filled with profound shock, explosive anger, or deep, festering resentment, gathered uniformly toward me, the old prince of Zhenan sitting on the high platform. Cough, cough. Facing this staggeringly large-scale, sudden family reunion scene, although I was 80 years old, my skin was remarkably, exceptionally thick. I slowly stood up from my soft couch, facing the howling wind and gathering rain of Mount Tai. I stood tall with my hands clasped loosely behind my back, a spirited, entirely unbothered smile curling right at the corner of my mouth. In fact, I was a person who had undergone transmigration. 80 years ago, I transmigrated into this world as a crying infant, entirely without any cheat-like golden finger to guide my path, but relying solely on my own intense hard work, boundless talent, and a little bit of opportunistic luck. I had achieved absolutely everything a mortal could ever dream of achieving. I reached the absolute pinnacle of officialdom, possessed wealth rivaling a nation, and stood entirely invincible within the martial forest. Most importantly, my life had been wonderfully romantic and entirely carefree, with gorgeous soulmates scattered all over the land. Even I myself did not know exactly how many romantic debts I had left behind in my wake. Forget it, forget it. Since everyone happens to be gathered here today, let's acknowledge your ancestors and return to the clan, I said, gently stroking my white beard as I let out a hearty, booming laugh. At this exact moment, my inner state of mind suddenly reached an unprecedented, beautiful sense of perfection. Waking up to hold the absolute power of the world, sleeping drunk on the soft knees of legendary beauties, surrounded by exceptional children and grandchildren, where all the great heroes of the world are actually my children. As a mere mortal living in this world, to have lived to this point, this life was truly worth it. In this mortal world, there was simply nothing left worth pursuing. This life, I have no regrets. The very moment the words "no regrets" firmly settled deep into my heart, the immense martial arts barrier that had remained completely stagnant within my body for 30 long years quietly shattered, precisely at the very last moment when my natural vitality was about to expire. The moment my spirit forcefully broke through the physical barriers of heaven and earth, my cloudy elderly eyes opened wide with absolute clarity. Relying entirely on this astonishing final leap before my death, I actually managed to follow a tiny glimmer of brilliant light in the darkness, allowing my vision to pierce directly through the dense, heavy layers of storm clouds above. High above the gale winds, a majestic immortal wearing a clean cyan Taoist robe was calmly riding a flying sword through the sky. An immortal? In this world, there really are true cultivators? My heart was violently shaken, and I stared fixedly, unblinkingly at the magnificent figure riding the sword through the heavens. And at this exact moment, the immortal drifting above the clouds seemed to have sensed something from below. He paused slightly in his flight, his ancient detached gaze piercing directly through the wind and driving rain of Mount Tai, falling precisely upon my dying body. There was absolutely no terrifying rage of descending heavenly lightning as told in mortal storybooks, nor was there any high and mighty, furious rebuke for my intrusion. In the immortal's cold eyes, there was only a trace of faint compassion from a high-ranking being looking down at a minor ant, accompanied by a touch of quiet helplessness. Touching the Tao through raw martial arts, To think you are actually capable of glimpsing the light outside the realm with nothing more than a mortal body. The immortal's ethereal, ringing voice sounded directly inside my mind, accompanied by a long, heavy sigh that echoed through my consciousness. Excellent comprehension ability, truly astonishing perseverance. It is just a massive pity. Without a spiritual root, ultimately, you possess only a mortal bone. Let dust return to dust and earth return to earth. The immortal shook his head slowly, choosing not to look down at the world again. With a gentle, graceful wave of his long sleeve, he turned into a brilliant streak of light, like a falling meteor, and completely disappeared into the vast horizon. In this world, true longevity actually existed, sword riding existed, and immortals were real. It was just a cold, harsh reality that it had absolutely nothing to do with me, Suyu. The immutable laws of heaven and earth, summarized in those two devastating words, spiritual root, had violently severed all of my future possibilities. The extreme, profound shock echoing through my heart, combined with the volatile, sudden breakthrough at the very end of my natural life, proved too much for my fragile vessel. I spat out a massive mouthful of dark blood, and my 80-year-old body fell straight backward toward the floor of the platform. Father, Your Highness, Master Su. Amidst the frantic, deafening wails of my massive group of illegitimate children and my frantic old lovers, my vision gradually, entirely sank into an absolute, dark abyss. In the deep sea of my fading consciousness, time began to flow backward at an incredible speed, and the revolving lantern of my long life quietly lit up. At that final moment, I did not see the detached immortal, nor did I chew on the bitterness and regret of not possessing a spiritual root. What I saw instead was the heavy snow covering the sky, the misty, beautiful rain of Jiangnan, and the lone, rising smoke of the vast desert. And scattered across those vivid landscapes, I saw the beautiful, peerlessly enchanting faces of the women I had loved. The swirling scene of my memory froze gracefully at the banks of the Qinhuai River 20 long years ago. The painted pleasure boat swayed slightly on the water, and the gentle drizzle was like finely woven silk. Liu Ruyan, who was then celebrated as the undisputed #1 courtesan of Jiangnan, was wearing a light green gauze dress. She was in the absolute prime of her youth, possessing bright, sparkling eyes and flawless white teeth. She held a delicate oil paper umbrella, smiling with unmatched grace up at me, who was then dressed in fine, luxurious clothes and riding a spirited, proud horse at the bridgehead. In the soft movement of her eyes, there was an unmelting, water-like tenderness that could warm the coldest heart. Then, the vivid scene shifted, taking me to the heavy, howling snow at the icy summit of Mount Hua. Abbess Jueqing, who would later become famous and feared throughout the world for her coldness, was then just a fiercely proud, tsundere young swordsman who would blush furiously at a single romantic word. She stubbornly lifted her beautiful chin, which was covered in flying flakes of snow, allowing me to gently place that distinctive piece of 3 lives interlocking jade around her slender neck. At that time, there was absolutely no coldness or resentment in her eyes, only a deep love and a sweet shyness that were about to overflow. Another flash of light, and the memory settled into a quiet, endlessly long night at the high stargazing tower inside the imperial city. The high-ranking female imperial preceptor had completely taken off her heavy, intimidating court attire, wearing only a thin, delicate gauze. She leaned gently and trustingly against my shoulder, pointing her slender finger up at the countless stars glittering in the night sky as she murmured, "Master Su, no matter how beautiful this world's sweeping rivers and majestic mountains are, they are not even 1/10,000th of what is reflected inside your eyes." And then came the memory of that daring, fire-like saintess of the demonic sect, who had passionately and forcibly kissed me right on the edge of a sheer cliffside, and that foreign princess who had galloped wildly alongside me on the vast grassland outside the Great Wall, her laughter sounding as crisp as silver bells. Face after face, captured at their youngest, most breathtakingly beautiful, and most peerlessly enchanting ages, danced vividly on the very tip of my heart. Looking upon these magnificent pictures of my past, The tiny trace of lingering regret I originally harbored, due to my lack of a spiritual root, was suddenly and completely relieved. The high and mighty immortals can ride the wind on flying swords and live for thousands of years. But so what? They might not ever experience a single shred of the wild, unbridled carefreeness that I, Su-Yu, have thoroughly enjoyed for 80 magnificent years. I have drunk the strongest, finest wine in this world, ridden the fastest, most spirited horses, and wielded the sharpest, most invincible swords. And above all, I have loved and been loved by the most beautiful women in this world. My own bloodline has branched out so thoroughly that it now completely dominates the entire martial forest. The ultimate fireworks of this mortal world, the vast booming prosperity of the mundane earth, I have tasted it, all to the absolute extreme, and even my very bone marrow is permanently carved with the spirit of carefreeness. Even without a spiritual root, and even if I only lived as a mortal for 80 short years, my life was truly, vigorously, and magnificently lived. Cultivating immortality is good, but these 80 years in the mortal world, I, Su-Yu, have absolutely no regrets. Deep within the absolute darkness, my soul completely calmed down, and the corners of my mouth finally rose uncontrollably into a smile. The very last trace of vitality inside my physical body was gently severed. It was as if I had just walked through an incredibly long, wonderful, and fulfilling journey, and after becoming extremely tired, I simply fell asleep peacefully. The corners of my lips, which were gradually losing their color in the cold air of Mount Tai, finally froze in an incredibly satisfied, comfortable, and utterly regretless smile. This life absolute perfection. The shocking change atop Mount Tai, accompanied by my passing as the legendary Prince of Jinan, instantly swept across the entire Great Xia dynasty like a wildfire. In the autumn of the 68th year of the Great Xia calendar, my mortal body was officially laid to rest. On that day, the capital city was draped in white mourning silk for 100 miles around, and the entire nation mourned my death. The funeral procession was vast and mighty, stretching from the gates of my princely mansion to dozens of miles outside the city walls, with absolutely no end in sight. The reigning emperor was completely overwhelmed with a profound grief. Not only did he suspend all imperial court affairs for 3 full days and posthumously confer upon me the unprecedented title of Prince of Equal Rank, but he also donned white mourning robes himself and personally walked out of the safety of the imperial city to escort my spirit on its final journey. At the very front of my funeral procession, the scene was truly unprecedented in the history of the realm. The brand new leader of the righteous martial arts alliance, the peerless young genius of the demonic sect, the head of the Bodhidharma Academy of the venerable Shaolin Temple, the young leader of the beggar sect. These supreme prodigies, who could make the entire world tremble just by stamping their feet, were all present. At this moment, they were all dressed in coarse mourning attire, their eyes completely bloodshot with tears as they knelt respectfully on both sides of the hearse, weeping exactly as if they were my biological children or nephews. There were also dozens of peerless beauties of the martial arts world possessing varying charms and esteemed status, along with powerful female elders from various famous sects, all crying and weeping bitterly before my bier. I had been a man of great romance throughout my 80 years of life. In my death, the entire Great Xia imperial court and the whole of the martial arts world were united in mourning for me. Time flows on relentlessly, and the joys and sorrows of the living eventually return to dust. Yet, in the endless absolute void where no mortal soul knew, just as my soul had completely faded into the blackness and I thought everything had finally come to a perfect, peaceful end, a cold and emotionless mechanical prompt suddenly resounded in the deep darkness. Ding! Detected that the host has passed away peacefully in the first life. System activated. Book of Reversing Destiny has been officially bound. As long as the host's bloodline is not severed, the true spirit can reincarnate among the host's descendants, beginning the formal settlement for the host's first life. Hearing these words echo through the void, my consciousness, which had been sleeping in the absolute quiet of death, was suddenly pulled back to full awareness. Looking out into the empty space, I could only wonder what kind of destiny was being unfolded before me. The cold, mechanical voice continued to echo relentlessly in the absolute depths of my soul, reading out the grand tapestry of my past achievements. Host identity, peak of mortal martial arts, Prince of Jinan of the Great Xia. In the first life, you were born into the Great Xia dynasty as a mortal with no background. You practiced martial arts diligently, rising against the current, defeating all heroes under heaven, reaching the pinnacle of martial arts, were conferred the title of Prince of Jinan, and attained the highest position among subjects. Throughout your life, you were dashing and unrestrained, full of romance with soulmates all over the land, and your bloodline descendants spread far and wide, dominating the entire martial arts world and half of the imperial court. You enjoyed the ultimate worldly pleasures and prosperity, and caught a glimpse of an immortal's trail on your 80th birthday. Between life and death, you saw through the vanity of the world, your state of mind became perfect, and you passed away with a smile. Final evaluation, white ordinary 9 stars. Evaluation grades from low to high are white, green, blue, purple, gold, red color. Reward received 90 fate-defying points. As the virtual panel emitting a faint ethereal glow materialized before my eyes, I was completely stunned for a long while. I truly hadn't expected that my cheat-like golden finger would only arrive after I had already drawn my final breath. It was honestly a bit absurd. Subsequently, I couldn't help but let out a hearty laugh that echoed through the empty void. White ordinary 9 stars? I roamed the martial arts world for an entire lifetime, completely invincible under heaven, with a house full of exceptional descendants, yet in the system's final judgment, I am still just an ordinary person of the basic white level. However, I soon let the slight grievance go. That fleeting, magnificent glimpse before my death, where I had seen with my own eyes a true immortal riding the wind on a flying sword, had completely recontextualized my view of power. No matter how high a mortal's martial arts were, in the grand scheme of this world, he probably wasn't even as strong as a slightly robust ant. Without spiritual roots, one is ultimately just a fragile mortal bone. Being able to obtain the highest 9-star rating of the white level already proved that I had successfully squeezed my mortal potential to its absolute crushing limit. Book of Reversing Destiny panel has been opened. Rules explanation. 1. Fate-defying points are the only core currency of this system. The host must consume all of them before starting a new reincarnation. They cannot be retained or accumulated for future lives. 2. Except for the state of mind, attribute bound to the true spirit, which can be permanently accumulated and retained, all other attributes will be cleared and reset every life. 3. Before starting reincarnation, the host can consume all fate-defying points obtained this time to invest in initial attributes. 4. This system adopts a historical highest evaluation guarantee mechanism. Since fate-defying points cannot be retained, the system will automatically select the highest evaluation achieved in the host's reincarnation history as the base guarantee points for each life. Even if the host achieves nothing in one life, the next life can still start with these guaranteed points. Looking at these 4 clear and remarkably simple rules, I found myself surprisingly entirely calm in my current soul state. There was absolutely no wild, uncontrolled joy at obtaining a golden finger, nor was there any manic excitement making me want to dance. I merely cast my analytical gaze toward the attribute allocation layout detailed below. The glowing text on the virtual interface shifted smoothly, laying out the exact rules for how I could forge my next existence. Fortune, ethereal luck, affects the probability of turning bad luck into good, the luck of picking up treasures while walking, and the chance of surviving disasters. Aptitude, cultivation talent, determines your spiritual root grade, special physique and physical talent. Comprehension ability, wisdom and insight, affects the speed at which you comprehend martial arts techniques, the depth of deducing the great Tao, and the ability to break through cultivation bottlenecks. Family background, birth background, determines your family influence, parent status, and the resources you can master at the start. Allocation rules. The exchange ratio for aptitude, comprehension ability, and family background is 1:1. Fortune involves the causality of heaven and earth and the river of fate. The exchange ratio is 10:1. The host's natural initial panel for the second life has been generated. Please view and invest in allocation. Following the mechanical prompt, an attribute panel emitting a soft, pale glow materialized directly before my eyes. Second life natural panel. Fortune 4. Aptitude 1. Family background 43. Comprehension ability 33. State of mind 8. Looking closely at the stark numbers on the panel, I couldn't help but freeze in place. After a brief moment of sheer astonishment, I suddenly shook my head inside the void and let out a light, self-deprecating laugh. My aptitude is only a single point. It truly seems that for this second life, the heavens still didn't intend to leave me a ticket to immortality. My tone carried absolutely no frustration or bitter complaints. Having lived through 80 years of worldly storms, I thoroughly understood the harsh truth that fortune inherently plays tricks on people. However, as my eyes swept over the remaining attributes, a hint of gentle, satisfied laughter appeared in my gaze. With 43 points in family background, it looks like some remarkable, powerful figures have arisen among my descendants over the years. Plus, possessing 33 points of natural comprehension ability means that if I only seek to be a wealthy, pampered idler in the mortal world, or to walk my old martial arts path all over again, it would be more than enough to dominate. It was just a massive pity that since I had already caught a glimpse of that magnificent light above the 9 heavens, how could I ever be willing to live as a blind frog in a dark well for another lifetime? I wanted to see the wider world. I pondered the choice slightly, beginning to carefully calculate the numbers in my heart. The expensive exchange ratio for fortune was 10:1, which was completely within my expectations. Something as ethereal as raw luck, involving the deep causality of heaven and earth and the flowing river of fate, was indeed one entire level higher than other standard attributes. Right now, I possessed exactly 90 fate-defying points in total from my 9-star settlement. If I desperately invested everything I had into fortune, I could only exchange them for a mere 9 points, which in the grand scheme of destiny very likely wouldn't even cause a single ripple. However, having lived an entire life, I knew the undeniable truth that the world is entirely unpredictable. Sometimes, a single sliver of luck hidden in the dark is precisely what determines life and death when you are trapped in a desperate situation. Even if I can only afford to add one single point to it, I should absolutely buy a variable to turn bad luck into good. I made my final decision with absolute calm, ready to allocate the remaining 80 points to pave my road toward the immortal path. With my decision firmly made, I channeled my remaining 80 fate-defying points with precise, deliberate intent. If my natural aptitude was a miserable 1 point, then I would forcefully rewrite it. I dumped a staggering 50 points directly into aptitude, determined to break the curse of the mortal bone and secure a genuine ticket to the world of cultivation. Next, I invested 20 points into comprehension ability, boosting my base wisdom to ensure that no martial technique or immortal Tao would be beyond my grasp. Finally, I placed the remaining 10 points into family background, reinforcing the influence of my descendants, to guarantee that I would inherit a mountain of starting resources from the very moment of my new birth. The interface flickered, consuming the points entirely as a crisp notification chimed. Allocation complete. The host's initial panel for the second life has been generated. Second life final panel. Fortune 5/4 plus allocation 1. Aptitude, natural 1 plus allocation 50. Family background, 53, natural 43 plus allocation 10. Comprehension ability, 53, natural 33 plus allocation 20. State of mind, 8. Panel lock, true spirit begins to be guided. I stared at the newly forged numbers with a sense of quiet pride. An aptitude of 51, paired with a comprehension ability of 53. This was a foundation that my first life could only dream of. I had successfully transformed myself from a talented ant into a terrifying prodigy waiting to be born. Suddenly, the silent void began to tremble. A massive, radiant beam of light emitting a soft, golden glow descended from the unseen heavens above, piercing through the dark abyss. It wrapped around me warmly, completely enveloping my floating soul state. I felt a powerful, gentle tug pulling my true spirit upward, guiding me toward the river of reincarnation. There was no fear, no hesitation, and no lingering attachment to the past. The stage of the Great Xia dynasty was behind me, and an entirely new legendary journey was about to unfold among my own bloodline. As the blinding light completely consumed my consciousness, I closed my eyes, ready to open them to a second life. The scorching sun hung incredibly high in the clear sky, radiating down like a massive, blazing furnace. On the remote border of the Yo Kingdom, deep within the dozens of acres of spiritual fields located on the dusty outskirts of the Qingmu market, intense waves of suffocating heat rolled continuously across the cracked land. I stood completely still right by the narrow ridge of the field, my calloused hands quickly forming a series of familiar, rhythmic, magical seals. "Haste," I muttered in a low, focused shout. Following my command, the meager, shallow reserves of spiritual energy resting within my physical body suddenly surged out, flowing rapidly along my meridians. High up in midair, a small, localized cluster of gray-white clouds materialized completely out of thin air, followed immediately by a light, refreshing drizzle that contained a faint trace of precious spiritual energy. This was nothing more than a basic, low-level magical spell, the Lesser Cloud and Rain Art. Down below, the few green rice stalks, beautifully nourished by this sudden spiritual rain, swayed slightly in the wind and greedily absorbed the moisture. Right before my eyes, the originally shriveled grains visibly plumped up by a small fraction. I gently dispersed the remaining magic of the spell, raised my sleeve to thoroughly wipe the thick layer of sweat from my forehead, and looked out over the vast spiritual field stretching before me, exhaling a long, turbid breath of exhaustion. The unique spiritual rice produced by these specific crops was the absolute staple food used across the land to sustain low-level cultivators. In this world, the cultivation society maintained an incredibly strict, unforgiving hierarchy. Those bottom-tier, struggling cultivators, who possessed absolutely no powerful background and suffered from low talent, did not even deserve to use standard spiritual stones in their daily lives. They could only rely entirely on eating 3 basic meals of low-grade spiritual rice a day just to maintain the meager, fragile spiritual energy inside their bodies. Of course, I actually had a few spiritual stones to my name now, but I had to wait patiently until I completely finished my exhausting manual work for the day. My current birth name in this life was Su Tian, but deep within the absolute core of my soul, I was far more accustomed to another name entirely, my original name, Su Yu. Exactly a month ago, I had finally broken through the suffocating mystery of the womb, completely awakening the vast memories of my spectacular past life. At this current moment, a full 100 years had officially passed since the historic day I had died smiling as the Prince of Jinan of the Great Xia dynasty. 100 long years had gone by, powerful dynasties had shifted and empires had fallen. Such were the inevitable, sweeping vicissitudes of the mortal world. The vast, booming bloodline that I had personally left behind back then had either completely vanished into smoke during the chaos of mortal wars, or the descendants had changed their family names and scattered to the ends of the earth to survive. Yet, one extremely fortunate branch of my descendants had, by a bizarre twist of fate decades ago, actually managed to step completely out of the mortal realm. They had crossed over the threshold into this vast, boundless cultivation world, and with great difficulty, took root right here in the Qingmu market on the border of the Yue Kingdom, establishing a humble cultivation family. The Qingmu Su clan. When I had just successfully broken through the mystery of the womb and awakened my memories, I had actually seriously considered whether I could obtain some special treatment and premium cultivation resources within the family by directly revealing my true identity to the elders. but after a few days of careful, quiet observation from the sidelines, I quickly dismissed this naive, foolish thought. 100 years of time might not be considered a particularly long period in the grand scheme of the cultivation world, but in the mortal world it had already easily spanned 3 or 4 entire generations. The senior members who now established the Qingmu clan and held absolute power, if truly traced all the way back through the family tree, were not even my own biological children from back then. At most, they could only be considered a highly distant branch of a branch. To this group of high and mighty cultivators who had already stepped onto the glorious path of immortality, mortals were all like cheap blades of grass. How could they possibly harbor any high degree of personal recognition, familial warmth, or deep awe for a mere mortal ancestor who had practiced basic martial arts in the mundane world 100 years ago? The name enshrined in the dark ancestral hall was merely a nominal, convenient symbol to them. If I, a 15-year-old low-level orphan, actually dared to run straight to the Internal Affairs Hall and brazenly demand that the powerful elders call me their ancestor, the outcome would definitely not be getting treated well with good food and premium wine. Instead, I would be brutally slapped to death on the spot by the penalty hall as a raving lunatic, or perhaps even have my soul forcibly searched under the dark suspicion of being possessed by an evil spirit. Having thoroughly figured out this cold relationship of raw interests, I accepted the current reality with extreme calmness. In this life, although I was still fortunately surnamed Su, my name was officially Su Tian, and I was merely an orphan from a side branch of the Qingmu clan. 15 years old, resting at the meager second level of chief refining, and possessing a miserable 9th grade spiritual root. In the vast, boundless cultivation world, a spiritual root was the only required proof to knock on the grand gates of immortality. These roots were divided strictly into 9 grades, according to their purity and quality. The 9th grade to the 7th grade were classified as low grade. The 6th grade to the 4th grade were mid grade. The 3rd grade to the 1st grade were high grade. Above the prestigious 1st grade, there were the legendary earthly spiritual roots, heaven spiritual roots, and some even rarer variant spiritual roots. My spiritual root was the worst possible 9th grade spiritual root, which essentially meant that when I tried to inhale the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, my meridians were heavily obstructed, making the absorption and conversion process extremely slow. Every single time I cultivated, I needed to expend several times the time and physical energy of others, which was why I had only barely managed to reach the 2nd level of qi refining at 15. However, although the wider cultivation world maintained a strict hierarchy, the situation was somewhat different inside a humble, unranked cultivation family like the Qingmu clan. The Su family currently possessed tens of thousands of ordinary descendants scattered across the surrounding mortal world. But those who could truly test positive for a spiritual root and step onto the path of immortality did not even add up to 100 people across several generations. Therefore, for such a bottom-tier, small family, as long as you were tested to have a spiritual root, even if it was the trashiest 9th grade spiritual root, the family would treat you like a treasure and bring you back to the main lineage. They would not only provide free food and housing, but also teach you the basic cultivation techniques. It was for no other reason than that, no matter how weak a cultivator was, they could still wield actual magic power. The family's valuable spiritual fields needed people to cast the lesser cloud and rain art to tend them. The low-level medicinal pills in the market needed people to help out with labor, and the family's raw ores needed people to manually smelt them. In a struggling small family, there was never any talk of being discarded. These bottom-tier disciples with 8th or 9th grade spiritual roots, although entirely mediocre in their aptitude, might only reach the late stage of qi refining in their lifetime, or perhaps not even achieve that much. But they were the absolute, vital cornerstone that maintained the daily operation of the entire family, providing enough basic food and clothing to the bottom tier and extracting their labor. This was the core survival strategy of a small family. At this time, the blazing sun was gradually shifting toward the west, and my exhausting day of manual labor finally came to an end. I patted the dry dirt and dust off my coarse clothes and followed dozens of other, equally disheveled, weary youths toward the direction of the family's bustling internal affairs hall. Today was a critical day. It was the day the family officially distributed our monthly stipends. In front of the stone steps of the internal affairs hall, people were actively bustling about. Everyone lined up in an orderly fashion according to the family roster, stepping forward in turn to receive their designated share. When my turn finally arrived, the gray-haired deacon in charge of distribution handed over a small coarse cloth bag. I took it into my hand and peered inside. There were exactly 5 low-grade spiritual stones. The young disciples, who received their spiritual stones, immediately gathered in groups of 2 or 3, their tired faces instantly filling with an irrepressible, pure joy. 5 low-grade spiritual stones were a massive, monumental sum for them. For us low-grade spiritual root cultivators currently struggling at the early stage of chi refining. Used sparingly and carefully combined with our daily spiritual rice, it was more than enough to completely support our basic cultivation needs for an entire month. However, before these excited youths could even warm the hard spiritual stones in their hands, a group of figures walked heavily over from the grand gate of the internal affairs hall, intentionally blocking our path out. The young man leading the group wore an elegant, beautifully embroidered Dharma robe. His face was handsome, but it carried a sharp, undisguised layer of arrogance. He brought a few sneering lackeys along and stood swaggeringly right at the center of the doorway. The originally noisy, joyful courtyard instantly fell into a heavy, deathly silence. The dozens of side branch youths who had just received their spiritual stones all changed color, their expressions turning rigid as they subconsciously clutched the storage bags containing their precious spiritual stones tightly against their chests. It was the young clan leader of the Su family's main lineage, young clan leader Su Hao. He was 18 years old, possessed a 6th grade spiritual root, and had already reached the 5th level of chi refining. Among this group of peers in the Su family who generally only possessed 8th to 9th grade low-grade spiritual roots, young clan leader Su Hao's 6th grade spiritual root was a marvel. It not only broke completely through the heavy shackles of low-grade talent, successfully reaching the rank of mid-grade, but it also granted him an extremely high spiritual energy affinity. In those massive legendary cultivation sects, a 6th grade spiritual root might only be considered an ordinary inner sect disciple with a bit of potential. But within the humble, unranked Qingmusu clan, this was already a killing child rarely seen in 100 long years. He was the absolute genius whom the entire family's upper echelon exhausted their limited resources and spared no expense to cultivate. He was also the solitary hope for the Su family to be able to stand firm in this brutal market filled with cruel, bloodthirsty competition in the future. You've all finished receiving your monthly stipends, right? Young clan leader Su Hao's arrogant gaze swept coldly across the crowded courtyard, his tone flat yet completely unyielding. He paused, resting his hand on his jade belt before dropping the bomb. The old rules, everyone hand over 3 low-grade spiritual stones. The exact moment those words left his mouth, the entire atmosphere in the venue instantly stagnated, turning as cold as ice. Almost everyone present felt their blood boil with humiliation, their fists clenched tightly at their sides, and they gritted their teeth in silent fury. 5 spiritual stones were the entirety of the cultivation resources we had worked hard and sweated for a month to earn. To have more than half of it directly, violently stripped away, absolutely no one was willing to hand them over. The path of the Great Tao is a continuous, ruthless struggle. If you retreat one step today, you will be forced to retreat every step tomorrow. Who on earth was genuinely willing to hand over their future to someone else? But even though they felt deeply humiliated and robbed, no one in the entire courtyard dared to step forward and openly reprimand him on the spot. Everyone knew with absolute clarity that the family's high-ranking upper echelon would not care at all about young clan leader Su Hao's blatant robbery. Concentrating bottom-tier resources to support the family's only true genius was a method tacitly approved and engineered by the elders. Complaining was entirely useless. In the tense crowd, a few stubborn, hot-headed youths gritted their teeth, clutching the cloth bags containing their spiritual stones tightly. As they stepped backward, their physical resistance obvious. I stood quietly at the very back of the crowd, my expression perfectly calm, my heartbeat steady. With the profound, century-long experience gathered from my previous life, I saw through the underlying political logic of the family's resource, tilting at a single glance. With my current low cultivation and weak status, forcibly resisting was entirely meaningless and would only needlessly invite a severe, bloody beating. Just as the two sides were deadlocked, the atmosphere grew incredibly tense, and it was about to turn into a brutal, one-sided beating. I calmly stepped out of the crowd, walking straight before young clan leader Su Hao. Under the shocked and judgmental gazes of my peers, I untied the small cloth bag in my hand, deliberately counted out 3 low-grade spiritual stones, and handed them over without a single shred of hesitation. This unexpected action made young clan leader Su Hao freeze for a brief moment. He had originally prepared to find a scapegoat to beat, wanting to kill the chicken to warn the monkeys. He hadn't expected that this Su Tian, who was usually like a silent, useless gourd, would be so remarkably sensible and cooperative. "You are Su Tian, right?" Young clan leader Su Hao weighed the 3 heavy spiritual stones in his hand, looking me up and down, with a flicker of slight surprise, before a satisfied, arrogant smile curled at the corner of his mouth. "Consider yourself sensible, now get lost." I did not respond to his mockery, nor did I lower my head in shame. I just gave a calm, perfectly polite nod and walked out of the grand gate sideways, stepping past his lackeys. As an old fox who had lived for over 100 years, how could I possibly get truly angry or lose my mind with a callow, arrogant youth over 3 measly spiritual stones? The young clan leader's tyranny was nothing more than the tacit instruction and engineered design of the family's upper echelon. Family resources were strictly limited. Dividing precious resources equally among a group of mediocre 9th-grade spiritual root disciples was an absolute waste of the clan's future. But if the elders directly reduced the monthly stipends of the side branches through an official decree, it would lead to a massive loss of morale and widespread rebellion. Therefore, they tacitly allowed the young clan leader to come out and play the villain, a move that could both concentrate resources to support their solitary genius and simultaneously allow this future leader to establish absolute authority over his peers. However, not everyone in the courtyard could be as profoundly rational as me. The exact moment I stepped out of the gate, I clearly heard the furious, muttered curses from the hot-headed youths behind me. "Bah, look at him, absolutely spineless. He doesn't even dare to stand up and resist. What kind of cultivator is he supposed to be? Truly a pathetic coward without a single shred of backbone. He's just destined to farm spiritual rice for the rest of his miserable life." Listening to these bitter youthful curses echoing behind my back, I didn't stop my steps for even a second, only letting out a faint, amused chuckle in my heart. Let them scream about pride while they get their bones broken. And surely enough, right after I left the premises, the volatile atmosphere inside the internal affairs hall plummeted straight to the freezing point. Young clan leader Su Hao looked at the remaining disciples, who were still clutching their cloth bags tightly with stubborn, furious eyes, and let out a cold, dangerous sneer. "What do you pieces of trash still need me to personally do it myself? Why should we give them to you?" One proud youth finally couldn't hold back his rage and shouted loudly, stepping forward. The very moment those words fell, young clan leader Su Hao moved like a flash. He swiftly raised his leg and delivered a devastating kick, the heavy impact knocking the arrogant youth violently to the ground. Immediately after, the dull, sickening sound of heavy fists and brutal kicks rang out continuously inside the internal affairs hall. Young clan leader Su Hao's martial attacks were entirely ruthless, backed by his superior cultivation. The few stubborn youths who were entirely unwilling to hand over their spiritual stones were soon beaten black and blue, falling miserably to the dirt floor and wailing in agony. After a completely one-sided, bloody beating, the entire scene became utterly quiet, save for the low groans of the injured. Young clan leader Su Hao stood tall in front of the few bleeding people who had fallen to the ground, looking down at their broken pride from a position of absolute power. Originally, handing over 3 would have been more than enough. Young clan leader Su Hao's tone was as cold as winter frost, as his eyes scanned the trembling, terrified crowd. Now, I've completely changed my mind. Each of you must hand over 4. In the dusty courtyard of the Internal Affairs Hall, the frantic screams and the dull, sickening sounds of heavy fists and brutal kicks gradually subsided into a tense quiet. Several of my side branch youths, who had just been completely filled with passionate pride and had loudly sworn to defend their hard-earned spirit stones to the absolute death, were now curled up miserably on the dirt ground. They were heavily bruised, swollen, and emitting low, painful groans as they clutched their aching bodies. Young clan leader Su Hao swaggered forward over their broken pride and without a single shred of ceremony, forcibly confiscated 4 low-grade spirit stones from the small cloth bags they were still clutching tightly in their trembling hands. He deliberately left only 1 single stone for each of them, just barely enough to sustain their meager lives for the coming month. A bunch of lowly, stubborn wretches who absolutely refuse a polite toast only to be violently forced to drink a forfeit. Young clan leader Su Hao sneered coldly. He carelessly tossed the extorted spirit stones into his own embroidered storage bag, clapped his hands together to rid them of dust, and instantly felt completely refreshed. The exact way he suppressed his own flesh and blood clansmen was certainly ugly and tyrannical to any outside observer. But this intoxicating sense of raw power, trampling over other people's scarce resources and grinding their personal dignity into the dirt, made this 18-year-old young clan leader feel incredibly deeply drunk on his own status. The young clan leader is truly mighty. These side branch scum just need a severe beating. They don't understand the young clan leader's grand, good intentions at all. Beside him, his 2 fawning lackeys immediately stepped forward, bowing their heads obsequiously as they handed over a clean silk handkerchief. Young clan leader Su Hao took the handkerchief to casually wipe his hands. But just as he was about to turn his back and leave the courtyard, his sharp gaze caught a thin figure standing perfectly quiet just outside the grand gate. It was me. I was the Su Tian who had just been the very first to hand over the spirit stones and walk away. What? Can't bear to part with those 3 spirit stones after all, and want to come back here for a bloody beating? Young clan leader Su Hao raised an eyebrow, a dangerous flash of impatience and hostility instantly igniting in his eyes. Seeing his reaction, the 2 lackeys also immediately stepped forward to frame his sides, aggressively rubbing their hands together and secretly circulating their internal spiritual power, ready to strike. However, facing this incredibly tense, violent situation, I did not show the absolute slightest hint of fear or weakness. Instead, I calmly straightened the creases of my coarse clothes, stepped forward, and bowed deeply and respectfully to young clan leader Su Hao. My execution of etiquette was so flawless, so comprehensive, and my physical movements so perfectly standard that even the most observant, traditional old eunuch serving in the secular imperial palace could not have found a single fault with my posture. The young clan leader has completely misunderstood my intentions, I said, slowly straightening my back. My expression remained perfectly calm, but my tone was precisely calibrated, carrying 7 parts sincere guilt and 3 parts perfectly measured, profound admiration. Su Tian has returned here not for the sake of the spirit stones, but because I suddenly understood a grand principle during my walk, and I have come specifically to offer my apologies to the young clan leader. Oh? Young clan leader Su Hao was stunned for a moment, his aggressive stance faltering slightly. Apologize for what? I let out a heavy, solemn sigh, my gaze sweeping over the bruised youths on the ground who were still groaning on the verge of tears, and spoke with a tone of heartbreaking grief. Just moments ago, I was just as foolish and short-sighted as them, bitterly thinking your actions were tyrannical and unjust. But only halfway down the ridge did I suddenly wake up from my dream. The current situation in Qingmu Market is treacherous and unpredictable, with several surrounding major clans constantly eyeing our Su family like hungry tigers. If our scarce resources were divided completely equally among a group of us, ninth grade poor talent, it would merely result in a few more low-level cultivators who can do nothing but grow spirit rice for the rest of their lives. Only by concentrating the clan's entire foundation to support you, a sixth grade spirit root prodigy, can our Su clan truly gain a permanent foothold in this brutal market. Having said this, I looked directly into young clan leader Su Hao's eyes, making my gaze burn with a perfectly manufactured fanaticism and deep understanding. As a sixth grade spirit root prodigy, the young clan leader bears the heavy burden of the rise and fall of our entire clan. What you took from us today was not mere spirit stones, but the collective hope for our Su family to survive in this market. It is entirely laughable that these people are so incredibly short-sighted. They simply do not understand the immense pressure and unfair infamy you must bear on your shoulders. Su Tian is dull-witted, but I only ask to follow faithfully by your side from now on to handle miscellaneous chores, assisting the young clan leader in achieving foundation establishment early and spreading our clan's divine might across the land. As my passionate, sweeping words fell, the entire internal affairs hall plummeted into a dead, stunned silence. The few youths lying miserable on the ground even forgot to groan in pain, their bloodshot eyes widening to the size of saucers, as they stared up at me as if I were some kind of terrifying, shameless monster. In this world, how could there possibly be such a sycophantic person, calling blatant open robbery a great sacrifice of enduring humiliation for the family? Beside the young clan leader, the two lackeys looked at one another, their cheeks burning with sudden inadequacy. They had honestly thought their own flattery skills were already perfect. But compared to my display today, they were nothing more than amateur farmers trying to paint a masterpiece. Even young clan leader Su Hao, standing at the very front, was completely stunned into place. Although he routinely snatched resources simply to satisfy his own selfish desires and to act tyrannically within the family, who on earth wouldn't want to drape themselves in a glorious cloak of greatness and self-sacrifice? What young people can least resist is this exact kind of high and mighty, noble flattery, especially an 18-year-old who had been held in the palm of the family's hand his entire life. I watched the corners of Su Hao's mouth twitch as he tried desperately to conceal his swelling pride, entirely unable to suppress them from curling upward. I couldn't help but let out an old fox-like chuckle deep within my heart. In my past life, I had been the Prince of Jinan for most of my existence, holding the absolute power of the world in my grasp. What kind of person hadn't I seen? The world always cursed the emperor for being incompetent, for liking sycophantic villains and alienating loyal ministers who spoke frank advice. But only those who have truly sat in that seat of ultimate power understand. Those in high positions least need others to tell them what to do. Frank ministers are useful, but they are like rough sandpaper, constantly grating against the superior's self-esteem. But villains? They are the perfect lubricant. They capture the most hidden dark desires in the superior's heart and use the most flowery language to ennoble them. They provide the highest level of emotional value. An emperor needs frank ministers to govern, but he absolutely needs villains to soothe that lonely heart standing out in the cold at the highest peak. Good! Good! Young clan leader Su Hao said the word 3 times, his gaze toward me transforming from initial contempt into a heavy hint of profound appreciation. Young clan leader Su Hao strode forward with a broad smile, his previous hostility completely evaporating as he reached out and firmly patted my shoulder, letting out a loud booming laugh. I truly didn't expect that among this massive group of short-sighted idiots there would actually be someone as righteous and clear-headed as you. You are entirely right. How can the mere sparrow ever understand the grand ambition of the soaring swan? My plans for the future are grand, so how could these dull-witted people ever hope to comprehend them? He paused, looking at me with a gaze full of newfound warmth. You are called Su Tian, right? From this very day onward, you will follow me." Young clan leader Su Hao waved his hand with an immense flourish, his posture full of youthful, heroic spirit. Immediately after, he glanced over at his two lackeys, who were standing off to the side looking slightly at a loss, clearly worried about losing their favored positions to a newcomer. Seeing their subtle shift in body language, I immediately bowed slightly and added with a gentle, reassuring smile. These two respected clan brothers by the young clan leader's side have worked tirelessly day in and day out to share your heavy burdens and resolve your difficulties. Su Tian is merely a newcomer here, and I will certainly need to rely heavily on the vast experience and guidance of these two clan brothers in the future. This subtle, face-saving remark worked like absolute magic. The two lackeys, who had originally been highly vigilant and defensive, instantly lowered their guard completely. The hostile glare in their eyes softened, looking at me with a much more pleasant, welcoming expression. They silently thought to themselves that this new kid truly knew how to handle people and navigate the world. Young clan leader Su Hao, seeing the harmony among his followers, spoke even more generously to me. "Speak up, Su Tian. Since you have chosen to join my camp, I, the young clan leader, must naturally be completely clear on rewards and punishments. What kind of official job do you want within the family?" Facing this incredibly lucrative promise, my face remained perfectly calm with absolutely no ripples of excitement showing in my eyes. I took the opportunity to lower my gaze respectfully, keeping my tone perfectly measured, calm, and gentle. I have frequently heard that the side branch disciples often slack off in their duties out in the outer spirit fields, leading to a noticeable reduction in our family's spirit rice production. If the young clan leader places his trust in me, Su Tian is entirely willing to take up the exhausting position of spirit field inspector to watch over those people for you, ensuring that absolutely no family resources are lost or wasted. The spirit field inspector? Young clan leader Su Hao was stunned for a moment, his eyebrows knitting together in confusion. This specific job was universally known within the clan to be not only physically tiring, but also incredibly easy to offend people. Apart from possessing a bit of insignificant, low-level jurisdiction over the fields, there was basically absolutely no illicit profit or extra oil to be made from it. "Are you absolutely certain you want to take up this specific job?" Young clan leader Su Hao asked, his voice filled with a heavy hint of suspicion. "To go through fire and water for the young clan leader, I will not hesitate for even a single second," I declared resolutely, my voice echoing firmly across the courtyard. At this exact moment, the quiet deacon elder, who had been sitting calmly in the main seat of the hall, pretending to be completely deaf and dumb throughout the entire extortion scene, slowly opened his ancient eyes. He took a long, deep look at me, a trace of profound satisfaction and genuine appreciation flashing deep within his gaze. The clan concentrating its scarce resources toward the main lineage was a strict iron rule tacitly approved by the family's highest hidden authorities, and it was the fundamental reason why he, as the deacon elder, had allowed young clan leader Su Hao to come here to establish his tyrannical authority in the first place. But blatant, open robbery was ultimately a very ugly way to eat, and it easily triggered a dangerous, volatile resentment among the lower-level disciples. Yet today, with just a few beautifully crafted words, this young Su Tian had successfully transformed the young clan leader's petty extortion into a grand, noble cause of enduring humiliation for the greater survival of the family. This brilliant move not only pacified the bleeding hearts of the side branches, but it also gave the main lineage a perfectly legitimate, high-sounding step to gracefully walk down from. This child was extremely sensible, a rare, polished talent who knew exactly how to advance and retreat in politics. Young clan leader, since Su Tian possesses this deep loyalty to share your burdens, then you might as well fulfill his wish, the deacon elder said, nodding slightly as he stroked his long gray beard, officially setting the family tone. Starting from tomorrow morning, the outer spirit field inspection duties will be fully placed under the responsibility of Su Tian. With the deacon elder officially giving his word, young clan leader Su Hao naturally raised no objections. He gave me one final nod of approval and swaggered out of the internal affairs hall flanked by his lackeys, feeling thoroughly vindicated and satisfied. Only after their figures had completely vanished into the distance did I slowly straighten my spine, brushing a stray speck of dust from my robes. A tough job? A position with no profit to be made? To the short-sighted fools nursing their bruises on the floor, the role of spirit field inspector looked like a sentence to hard labor. But they were entirely wrong. During the grueling month I had spent farming under the scorching sun as a mere laborer, my sharp eyes, honed by a lifetime of military and political strategy, had long ago picked up on a hidden truth that others were too blind to notice. The defensive spirit-gathering array arranged by the Qingmusu clan to nourish the outer farmlands was incredibly crude and poorly maintained. Because of this shoddy craftsmanship, there were several highly concealed array nodes resting right on the absolute edge of the spiritual fields. Every single night at the dead of the Z-hour when the world was asleep, extremely pure, ownerless spiritual energy would silently overflow from these fractured nodes, bleeding into the night air and wasting away. With the legitimate official status of a spirit field inspector now serving as my absolute cover, I could openly roam the farmlands in the middle of the night without a single soul questioning my presence. I could sit directly beside those leaking nodes and quietly intercept that pure spiritual energy for myself, funneling it directly into my obstructed meridians to turbocharge my cultivation. A ninth-grade spiritual root was a terrible hand to be dealt, yes. But with an endless secret supply of pure spiritual energy and my boosted comprehension ability, the shackles of my trash aptitude would mean nothing. This was precisely where my true opportunity lay. While the young clan leader played his petty games of dominance and the other side branch disciples wept over their lost stones, I would absorb the very lifeblood of the family array in complete secrecy. Let them call me a coward. Let them call me spineless. In the end, the ultimate fireworks of this second life would belong to me alone. As young clan leader Su Hao and his arrogant entourage finally left the courtyard with their heads held incredibly high, the deacon elder of the Internal Affairs Hall slowly closed his ancient eyes to rest, casually waving his long sleeve to dismiss the rest of us. In an instant, the tense atmosphere in the dusty courtyard turned deeply strange and suffocating. Several of the collateral branch youths, who had just been full of fiery passion and had sworn to defend their spirit stones to the absolute death, slowly helped each other stand up from the dirt. They painfully wiped the fresh blood leaking from the corners of their mouths. But when they looked over in my direction again, there was absolutely no longer any trace of sympathy or brotherhood remaining in their eyes. There was only an unconcealable burning disdain and a deep festering anger. Pah! Utterly, thoroughly shameless. A hot-blooded youth fiercely spat a mouthful of bloody saliva onto the ground, staring fixedly at my back as he ground his teeth in pure rage. Su Tian, I never ever expected you to be such a spineless coward, so incredibly willing to break your own backbone. Cultivation is an act of defying the heavens themselves. It strictly requires a clear mind and a steadfast, unyielding Tao heart. Another youth barked, clutching his bruised chest as he sneered in passionate agreement. Today, for the mere sake of protecting a few measly spirit stones, you willfully trampled your own human dignity underfoot just to act as a sycophantic dog for young clan leader Su Hao. You have completely, utterly disgraced all of us, the proud children of the collateral branch. He stepped forward, his eyes blazing with self-righteous fury. That's right. Even though we only possess an 8th or 9th grade spiritual root and our natural aptitude is inherently inferior to others, we certainly don't lack the raw metal and iron backbone to climb higher. As long as we never abandon this precious heart that seeks the Tao, sheer diligence can easily make up for stupidity, and sooner or later, we will make something magnificent of ourselves. A pathetic sycophant like you, even if you manage to successfully curry favor with the main branch, is permanently destined to not go far on this grand path of cultivation. These soul-piercing words echoed loudly through the quiet courtyard, delivered with a passion that made it seem as though they were the ultimate masters of truth, standing proudly on the moral high ground. Listening to the righteous accusations being hurled continuously behind me, I stopped dead in my tracks. I did not turn around to face them, nor did I allow a single shred of anger to touch my heart. In fact, deep within my soul, I actually found the high-sounding remarks of these half-grown children to be somewhat naively, tragically cute. Passion, a steadfast Tao heart, diligence making up for stupidity. In my previous life, I had lived to the ripe age of 80, having thoroughly seen all the massive ups and downs of the mortal world, let alone the brutal, cutthroat cultivation world in any functioning society under heaven. Raw passion without actual talent and power to back it up is the single cheapest, most worthless thing in the world. Thinking you can magically defy the heavens and successfully change your fate just because you have a bit of temporary passion? That is nothing more than a pathetic, comforting placebo that the weak willfully use to numb themselves in the depths of their despair. Without real resources and without actual opportunities, no matter how hard you loudly scream or how much you temper your Tao heart to be harder than diamond, the final, unalterable outcome will always be the same. You will exhaust your natural lifespan as a laborer in the spirit fields, and your body will turn into a forgotten mound of yellow soil. One cannot speak of ice to summer insects, I murmured softly under my breath, shaking my head slightly in amusement. I did not bother to refute them with a single word, nor could I be remotely bothered to waste my breath arguing with them. I simply walked straight out of the Internal Affairs Hall, leaving their hollow pride behind. After leaving the bustling Internal Affairs Hall behind, I crossed several quiet streets on the dusty outskirts of the market and finally returned to my own residence. In this life, my biological parents had both tragically perished during a dangerous family mission years ago, leaving me entirely as an orphan. However, for established cultivation families, the general treatment of descendants who possessed a spiritual root, even those born of a side branch with a miserable ninth-grade spiritual root, was far superior to that of an ordinary mortal. Although I was an orphan, I was still officially assigned an independent small courtyard and lived completely alone in a spacious, comfortable main room. Not only that, but the clan had even assigned a personal maid responsible for taking care of my daily life, a luxury that allowed me to devote far more of my valuable time to cultivation and manual farming. Young master, you're back. The moment I pushed open the creaking wooden courtyard gate, a young girl wearing a simple and elegant long dress immediately came up to greet me with a soft smile. The girl was named Chinger, and she was about 16 or 17 years old. Her appearance was well arms above average, and her youthful figure had developed quite exquisitely. But between her delicate brows and eyes, there was always that distinct touch of absolute awe and quiet submission that was peculiar to mortals whenever they were forced to face cultivators. She skillfully handed me a warm, damp towel and whispered in a gentle tone, "This servant has already prepared hot water for you. Does the young master wish to bathe first, or would you like to eat first?" "No need for now. I'm going back to my room to cultivate," I said, taking the warm towel from her hands and casually wiping the sweat and dust from my face. I paused at the threshold, giving a calm instruction. "Make sure that no one disturbs me before nightfall." "Yes, young master." Chinger curtsied obediently, lowering her eyes before retreating outside the inner courtyard to wait for my next command. Closing the heavy bedroom door behind me, I walked straight to the bed and sat cross-legged on the mattress. I closed my eyes, and within a single breath, my mind instantly settled into absolute stillness. Since awakening the vast memories of my spectacular previous life a month ago, apart from working like a dog in the spirit fields every day, I had spent almost all of my remaining free time focused entirely on doing one single crucial thing: deducing the peak invincible martial arts technique from my previous life, the heavenly dragon true chi. In my previous life, I had reached the absolute pinnacle of martial arts legends with a mere mortal body. Because of that, my deep understanding of the human body's meridians and crucial acupuncture points and raw power bursts had long ago reached an unfathomable profound realm. Although the cultivation world's power system was incredibly vast, and possessed an extremely high ceiling, where moving mountains, filling vast seas, and achieving eternal longevity were all entirely possible. At the absolute bottom level, the actual combat ability of those cultivators in the early to middle stages of chi refining was surprisingly not as good as that of a secular martial arts grandmaster. Unless a cultivator managed to reach the late stage of chi refining, which is to say, after the chi refining 7th layer. Once they finally reached that elite realm, the spiritual power within their bodies would undergo a complete qualitative change. Not only would the destructive power of their elemental spells explode exponentially, allowing them to instantly erect a virtually indestructible spiritual shield, but they could also manipulate deadly magical artifacts to kill enemies from the air. This completely widened the distance and achieved a terrifying dimensional suppression over any form of martial arts. But below the chi refining 7th layer, in close quarters bloody combat, the refined techniques of secular martial arts were actually the true, undisputed path to victory. Therefore, I only needed to slightly adjust the intricate circulation route of the heavenly dragon true chi and replace the internal strength originally used to drive the moves directly with the raw spiritual energy of the cultivation world. With my comprehension ability, which was far beyond that of ordinary people, coupled with a lifetime of complete immersion in high-tier martial arts from my previous life, this transformation process was a natural, seamless success for me. I took a deep, steady breath and began to slowly guide the meager, shallow second level of chi-refining spiritual energy currently resting within my dantian. Following the newly adjusted circulation route of the heavenly dragon true chi, the spiritual energy no longer surged out from my palms in a simple, crude, and inefficient way like casting standard cultivation spells. Instead, it instantly transformed into strands of incredibly dense, overbearing undercurrents, speeding like lightning through the extraordinary meridians of my limbs and bones, compressing violently, and then preparing to explode with devastating force. Hum! As the spiritual energy circulated forcefully through my channels, my robes suddenly began to flutter and billow without a single breath of wind in the room. Faintly, there was a trace of an extremely weak but distinctly archaic and overbearing dragon roar, quietly vibrating deep within my physical bones. I opened my eyes abruptly, a sharp, piercing light shooting straight from my pupils into the dim room. It worked. Using pure cultivation spiritual energy to drive martial arts kill moves. This was undeniably the most terrifying close combat method for anyone trapped in the early to middle stages of chi refining. Within the exact same rank, if those pampered, sheltered flowers of the main lineage, who only knew how to stand completely still and slowly charge up their elemental spells, ever dared to let me get close to them, it would definitely be a case of certain instantaneous death for them. The technique has been successfully converted. Now the only thing I am lacking is the raw, brute accumulation of spiritual energy. I exhaled a long, heavy breath of turbid air, carefully withdrawing the surging spiritual energy back into my quiet dantian. I couldn't help but shake my head helplessly as I felt the pitifully small, shallow reserve of power left in my body. By this time, the sky outside had darkened completely. The blazing sun had long since set behind the distant mountains, and a cold, sharp crescent moon had quietly climbed above the dark clouds to illuminate the night. I had spent the entire grueling day manually farming in the spirit fields under a scorching sun, wasted some mental breath dealing with fools in the internal affairs hall, and then exhausted the last of my mental energy to successfully convert a peak martial technique upon returning. At this current moment, this young mortal body was deeply, profoundly exhausted. I pushed open the bedroom door and called out softly toward the dark courtyard. "Kinger, go prepare the hot water. I want to bathe and rest." Since I was living a second life, I should still thoroughly enjoy what small comforts I could find. This practical, balanced mindset was precisely the reason why I could live so clearly, comfortably, and patiently at the absolute bottom level of this world. In the boundless world of cultivation, time holds absolutely no meaning. One easily loses all track of the passing years. For those high and mighty, powerful cultivators, a span of 3 whole years is nothing more than a brief nap taken during a standard seclusion. But for a bottom-tier, struggling cultivation family rooted on the outskirts of the Qingmu market, over 1,000 days and nights are more than enough to completely smooth away the sharp edges and burning, naive passion of countless youths. It was deep in the absolute dead of night, specifically during the cold hour of the rat, bringing with it a dark moon and high, howling winds. On the extreme edge of the Qingmu Su clan's outer spiritual fields, hidden within a remote and dense bamboo forest, I sat cross-legged on an inconspicuous smooth blue stone. This very spot was one of the hidden leaking nodes of the family's spirit gathering array that I had successfully discovered 3 years ago. As the precise hour of the rat finally arrived, the massive formation's daily operation reached its weakest, most vulnerable point of transition. Wisps of extremely pure, ownerless spiritual energy, with a concentration that far exceeded anything found in the outside world, silently began to leak out from the fractured gaps in the stone node. I kept my eyes tightly closed, carefully controlling my breathing to perfectly synchronize my body with the precise, rhythmic pulse of the formation. Before those leaking wisps of pure spiritual energy could even begin to dissipate into the night air, they were aggressively swallowed, straight into my abdomen, not a single precious drop wasted, exactly as if a great whale were greedily drinking water from the sea. The cold spiritual energy traveled smoothly along my adjusted meridians, circulating through several major cycles before finally flowing directly into my dantian. Who knows exactly how much time had passed in that quiet darkness? A faint, muffled sound suddenly emanated from deep within my physical body, and immediately after, the spiritual energy fluctuations rippling around my skin surged upward by an entire level. Whoosh! An invisible gust of wind violently rippled outward from my seated form, causing the surrounding spiritual bamboo stalks to rustle and sway loudly in the dark. I slowly opened my eyes, a genuine glimmer of deep joy flashing in their depths. The 4th layer of Qi refining. Finally, I have successfully stepped into the middle stage of Qi refining. I stood up from the bluestone and lightly clenched my fist, feeling the newly awakened spiritual energy within me, which was now many times more vigorous and dense than before. A highly satisfied curve slowly tugged at the corner of my mouth. 3 years, bearing nothing more than a trash-tier, miserable 9th grade spiritual root, I had successfully broken through 2 minor realms in just 3 short years, forcibly raising my cultivation from the shallow 2nd level of Qi refining to the 4th layer of Qi refining. If this incredible feat were to ever spread, it would absolutely drop the jaws of the high-level elder members of the Qingmu Su clan. After all, this specific speed of cultivation was already absolutely no less than that of an average cultivator blessed with a coveted mid-grade spiritual root. The core reason I could create such a massive miracle, entirely bypassing the limits of my 2 lifetimes of experience and excellent comprehension ability, boiled down to one thing: the heavy accumulation of resources I had quietly amassed over these 3 years. 3 years ago, I had been completely willing to set aside my pride and put on a show of intense, loyal remonstrance for young clan leader Su Hao. That calculated move had successfully secured me the job of patrolling the spiritual fields, a task that seemed to everyone else both bitter and completely devoid of financial benefits. In the eyes of all the outsiders, I was nothing more than a pathetic, groveling lackey under young clan leader Su Hao. But only I knew exactly how comfortable and lucrative my life had truly been these past 3 years. First, by acting directly under the powerful banner of young clan leader Su Hao, I had completely secured the 5 low-grade spirit stones issued monthly by the Internal Affairs Hall without anyone daring to touch them. After all, young clan leader Su Hao, that arrogant young master, was extremely concerned about his public reputation. As a dignified, high and mighty young clan leader, if he were to rob the spirit stones of his very own loyal followers, how could he ever lead his faction if word got out? Others would only mock him behind his back for being incredibly petty and ungrateful. In fact, Regarding this specific point, I had initially played a brilliant game of hard to get right after joining him. After receiving my very first monthly stipend 3 years ago, I had intentionally feigned absolute righteousness and proactively offered the spirit stones directly to young clan leader Su Hao. I had claimed with a straight face that I was completely willing to give up everything for the sake of the young clan leader's glorious cultivation career. At that exact time, before young clan leader Su Hao could even respond to my offer, the 2 old lackeys following him turned entirely green in the face. They became deeply anxious, winking furiously at each other, while likely cursing my ancestors down to the 18th generation in their hearts. "Good kid, you're really trying to outdo us here?" I could practically read their minds. "If you hand over all your spirit stones, are we supposed to hand ours over too? Isn't this trying to screw us to absolute death?" However, in order to maintain the boundless generosity and proud dignity of a young clan leader, Su Hao had decisively waved his hand to refuse my offer. He had even sternly reprimanded me on the spot, telling me not to underestimate his grand magnanimity. But it was precisely because of this calculated act that young clan leader Su Hao's personal impression of me soared through the roof, feeling that I not only knew how to talk beautifully, but was also highly commendable in my pure loyalty. Secondly, because of my official role as a patrol guard, the family was forced to issue an additional 3 spirit stones every month as a job allowance. This meant that while other collateral disciples could only keep 1 or 2 spirit stones a month to barely survive, I, without fail, could get my hands on 8 spirit stones every single month. It was several times more than anyone else in my tier. Combined with the pure, unowned spiritual energy I freeloaded from this formation node every single day at the hour of the rat, my progress under this heavy accumulation of resources was naturally rapid. In the world of cultivation, there are 4 absolute essentials to scaling the peak: wealth, companions, methods, and land. Wealth comes first before all else. The ancient ancestors truly did not deceive me, I muttered, brushing the cold night dew off my dark robes as I chuckled softly to myself. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but vividly recall the passionate peer youths in the Internal Affairs Hall courtyard 3 years ago who had so fiercely accused me of being a spineless coward. Over these past 3 years, because those proud individuals had actively chosen to defy and resist young clan leader Su Hao, their monthly stipends were strictly and ruthlessly withheld by the main branch, leaving them with barely 1 or 2 spirit stones to sustain their miserable livelihoods. Without sufficient spiritual energy for support, combined with the draining high-intensity labor they were forced to perform in the spiritual fields every single day, their futures had completely stalled. 3 years later, the vast majority of that passionate group of youths were still desperately struggling at the second level of chi refining, with their internal spiritual power making little to no progress. Only a very few who had forcibly squeezed their own essence and blood to cultivate had barely managed to touch the threshold of the 3rd layer of chi refining. Yet they paid a heavy price, appearing completely depleted of vitality, sallow-skinned and emaciated. Passion and dignity. In the face of an absolute resource monopoly, their lofty ideals had long since been violently pressed into the mud of the spiritual fields by harsh reality and crushed to absolute pieces. Nowadays, when those very same youths saw me walking past in my clean patrol uniform, leisurely collecting my 8 spirit stones every single month, their gazes remained deeply complicated. Yet, remarkably, no one dared to openly curse or criticize me anymore. In fact, some who could no longer bear the grinding poverty had even privately swallowed their pride and come to beg me in secret, desperately wanting me to put in a good word for them before the young clan leader so they could also secure a job allowance. This is the profound, unalterable sorrow of a bottom-tier cultivator. The 4th layer of chi refining. With my current true cultivation, among the young generation of the entire clan, I should officially be considered to be among the absolute best, right? I calculated carefully in my heart as I walked back along the dark forest path. That young clan leader Su Hao, who was fully supported by the concentrated resources of the entire clan, used the absolute best medicinal pills and the premium spirit-gathering array in the clan. Yet, even after 3 years had passed, he had only barely broken through from the 5th layer of Qi refining to the Qi refining 7th layer, just touching the threshold of the late stage of Qi refining. The transition from the middle stage to the late stage of Qi refining is a major notorious hurdle. The further one climbs, the more massive the spiritual energy required becomes. Breaking through 2 levels in 3 years, for a 6th grade spiritual root, was already the absolute limit achieved by piling up the entire clan's wealth. And apart from young clan leader Suhao himself, those among my peers in the clan who could successfully reach the 4th layer of Qi refining could be counted on a single hand. Those select few, without a single exception, were all the favored direct descendants of the powerful elders of the main branch, never lacking premium cultivation resources since childhood. In other words, I had started entirely from scratch, relying solely on my own wits and strength. I had forcibly, as a mere collateral orphan burdened with a trash 9th grade spiritual root, silently squeezed myself straight into the first tier of the clan's younger generation. Of course, I had absolutely no intention of showing off my true strength to the clan. A tree that stands out too far in the forest will always be the first to be destroyed by the howling wind. If the incredible cultivation speed of a 9th grade spiritual root were to suddenly rival that of a mid-grade spiritual root, once exposed, what would follow would certainly not be the clan's focused cultivation. Instead, it would be the harsh, bloody interrogation of the punishment hall. The power holders of these small, fragile families inherently reject any uncontrollable variables in their domain. My thoughts stirred, and I brought my micro-control over my physical meridians, a refined skill honed to perfection at the peak of martial arts in my past life, to its absolute extreme. Using the Heavenly Dragon True Qi method of closing acupoints and locking meridians, I forcibly compressed the thick, surging spiritual energy within my body to its absolute limit, locking it tightly deep within my dantian. This breath concealment technique, originating from the mundane martial arts of the mortal world, was not actually completely perfect. If I were to directly encounter a powerful cultivator at the 8th or 9th layer of Qi refining, they would easily be able to see through this forced energy-locking disguise at a single glance. But out here in the outer spiritual fields of the Qingmu market, those high-level members of the main branch simply disdained to ever set foot in such muddy, ordinary places. The people I could expect to encounter on a daily basis were, at most, simple stewards at the 5th or 6th layer of Qi refining. I would never run into top-tier experts above the 8th layer. Therefore, this specific set of breath concealment techniques was more than enough to handle my current situation. As my energy signature receded, the spiritual energy fluctuations I emitted to the outside world quickly fell back, eventually stabilizing steadily at the level of the 3rd layer of Qi refining. This disguise was just right. Collecting 8 spirit stones every month and spending 3 years breaking through from the 2nd level of Qi refining to the 3rd layer seemed extremely reasonable to any outside observer. It both demonstrated a value slightly stronger than the average collateral disciple and would never arouse the jealousy or vigilance of the main branch. I looked up at the faint fish belly white coloring appearing on the eastern horizon. It was already bright. It was time to go back and have a warm bowl of spirit rice porridge cooked by Chinger. The faint morning light of dawn broke slowly across the horizon, carrying with it the crisp, biting chill of early autumn. When I pushed open the creaking wooden door of my bedroom and walked into the courtyard, my maid Chinger had already been up for hours. She had meticulously prepared a bowl of soft, thick, and wonderfully glutinous spiritual rice porridge, placing it carefully on the smooth stone table in the center of the yard. Just as I swallowed the last spoonful of the warm, nourishing spiritual rice porridge, a low buzzing sound suddenly pierced the morning air. A standard transmission talisman came slicing straight through the sky from outside the courtyard, hovering vibratingly in mid-air. All collateral descendants who have officially reached the age of 18 must immediately proceed to the Internal Affairs Hall. for an emergency meeting. Do not delay under any circumstances. From the glowing talisman echoed the habitually cold, rigid, and stern voice of the deacon elder of the Internal Affairs Hall. I calmly put down my empty ceramic bowl and wooden chopsticks, a swift flicker of calculated thought flashing through my eyes. I walked back into the room, changed my clothes into the clean, standard clan attire of a formal disciple, and stepped out of my small courtyard. Along the dusty roads leading deeper into the estate, I encountered many other collateral descendants of the exact same age. All of them were hurrying forward in small groups, their young faces deeply marked by signs of intense confusion and nervous unease. 3 years of relentless time had left completely indelible, harsh marks upon every single one of them. Years of grueling, back-breaking toil in the family's spiritual fields under the scorching sun, combined with the extreme manufactured scarcity of their cultivation resources, had caused this group of youths, who had once proudly harbored grand, brilliant dreams of soaring immortality, to completely lose the vast majority of their youthful naivety and fiery passion. Looking at them closely as we walked, the vast majority now possessed hollow, haggard faces, and their internal cultivation was stuck firmly and hopelessly between the second level of chi refining and the third. They had absolutely no hope or momentum left to make any further progress on their own. Before long, everyone had arrived and packed into the spacious, stone-paved courtyard of the Internal Affairs Hall. We did not have to wait for long. The deacon elder, carrying his usual frozen, rigid expression and bearing the heavy responsibility for allocating basic resources to the lower levels, walked slowly out of the grand hall. He was flanked directly by young clan leader Su Hao, who stood proudly with his head held high, and 2 silent personal attendants. The deacon elder stood tall on the top of the stone steps. His gaze was as cold and completely indifferent as winter well water, as it slowly swept over the dozens of shabbily dressed, anxious collateral descendants gathered below him. You have all been practicing and cultivating under the care of the clan for several years now, and the vast majority of you have now officially reached the age of 18. The elder's voice, heavily amplified by his thick spiritual power, clearly resonated throughout the entire courtyard, vibrating in our ears. As for your own spiritual root aptitude and your actual progress in cultivation over these past few years, every single one of you must already have a perfectly clear, realistic understanding within your own hearts. The grand path of immortal cultivation emphasizes destiny, luck, and raw aptitude above all else. It is a path that simply cannot be forced by mere stubbornness. Since the great Tao is so incredibly difficult to attain for the mediocre, you should all recognize your reality early and fulfill other vital duties to sustain the clan. Hearing those ominous words, a sudden dark premonition arose like a tidal wave in the hearts of the listening youths. The elder paused for a moment, his tone shifting into something absolute and unquestionable. The clan council has officially decided that from this day onwards, every single one of you must marry. The Internal Affairs Hall has already carefully selected a group of young, virtuous, and completely innocent mortal women from our surrounding mortal territories for you. Later today, you will each make your selections according to the official roster and take them back to your quarters. Marry them and have children as soon as possible to expand the clan's side branches and propagate our bloodline. As soon as those heavy words fell from the elder's mouth, the entire stone courtyard erupted like a calm pond into which a giant boulder had been violently thrown, instantly causing an uproar of shocked voices. For an established clan of immortal cultivators, this was a known iron rule for maintaining the family's long-term continuity. Although low-level cultivators had their personal paths to immortality completely obstructed by their poor talent, they still possessed a trace of spiritual roots within their bodies. If they were to unite with mortal women, the biological probability of giving birth to offspring blessed with spiritual roots would always be far greater than the natural random reproduction occurring between ordinary mortals. The core reason why the family's higher-ups kept this large group of low-aptitude, 8th or 9th grade collateral descendants around became perfectly clear. Aside from exploiting our physical labor to farm the spiritual fields day in and day out, their other primary purpose was to use us as the literal seeds for continuing the clan's foundational bloodline. However, for this group of youths who had just barely reached adulthood and still nursed foolish dreams of greatness, this resolution was undoubtedly a terrifying bolt from the blue. Once they married mortal women and began having children, it was equivalent to the clan officially sealing their fates forever. It was a loud public declaration that their path to immortality was completely severed, and they would be forced to spend the rest of their miserable lives serving as mere tools for reproduction, slowly wasting away at the bottom of the Qingmu market. Elder, we are not even 20 years old yet and we still have immense potential for cultivation. How can our paths be forcefully severed just like this? A youth who was usually extremely diligent and currently stuck right at the threshold of the third level of qi refining stepped forward, his eyes completely bloodshot with rage as he protested loudly. That's right, Elder. Even if our natural aptitude is dull, we are entirely willing to work day and night to cultivate the spiritual fields for the sake of the clan. We only ask for the Elder's mercy and not to force these mortal marriages upon us. With someone bravely taking the lead, the other youths instantly chimed in one after another, their faces filled with deep indignation and heartbreaking grief. Looking down at the agitated, shouting crowd below the steps, the deacon elder did not grow angry in the slightest. There wasn't even a trace of extra expression appearing on his rigid, frozen face. He just continued to look at them with a bone-chilling coldness, waiting for the noise to die down before he slowly and deliberately spat out a single sentence. The clan will not force any of you. Those who truly do not wish to marry may certainly choose to refuse the arrangement. He paused, letting the relief hit them before delivering the cruel twist. However, since you are entirely unwilling to contribute to the clan's reproduction, the clan will no longer waste its resources to support idlers. Starting from next month, anyone who refuses to marry will have all of their monthly stipends from the Internal Affairs Hall permanently suspended. This sentence, like a massive basin of freezing well water, instantly and completely extinguished the youth's burning protests. The originally noisy, chaotic courtyard fell into a dead, suffocating silence in an instant. Suspend their monthly stipends. They only had 1 or 2 spiritual stones left each month to sustain their meager lives as it was. If even that tiny lifeline was completely cut off by the higher-ups, they wouldn't even be able to maintain the most basic cultivation required to keep their current realms. Watching the completely silent, defeated courtyard, the elder, who was well-versed in the classic management tactic of giving a heavy stick followed by a sweet carrot, softened his rigid tones slightly. Of course, to properly set an example for the rest, the clan council has also established generous rewards. Today, the very first person willing to accept the order to marry will be immediately rewarded with 10 low-grade spiritual stones. From then on, for every single offspring you successfully give birth to, the clan will reward you with an additional 5 spiritual stones. Furthermore, if that offspring is later tested and found to possess any spiritual roots, there will be additional, heavy rewards waiting for you. The crowd remained entirely motionless, trapped in a heavy silence. 10 low-grade spiritual stones were absolutely a massive fortune for these impoverished collateral descendants. But at this exact moment, whoever chose to be the first to step out would be equivalent to personally tearing apart the last remaining shred of an immortal cultivator's pride, bowing completely to fate and the clan's whim. The youth's stubborn pride and internal backbone made them hesitate deeply, even in the face of such massive financial benefits. And just during this tense stalemate where no one dared to speak up, I, who had been watching the entire farce coldly from the very back of the crowd, calmly took a step forward. Under the shocked gaze of countless incredulous eyes, I walked straight to the base of the steps, meticulously straightened the creases of my clothes, and bowed deeply to the deacon elder standing above. Disciple Su Tian is entirely willing to comply with the clan's wise arrangements and do my part to expand the clan's branches. My voice was neither servile nor overbearing, completely devoid of the slightest bit of grievance or reluctance. In an instant, dozens of burning gazes converged entirely upon my body. In those eyes there was intense shock, deep confusion, and undisguised bitter contempt. However, my expression remained perfectly normal. I didn't care about their judgmental gazes at all. This forced marriage that the others viewed as a toxic, life-ending poison was, to me, exactly what I secretly wanted. The ancient book of reversing destiny that I had bound to my soul possessed a core, immutable rule. As long as my biological bloodline was never severed, my true spirit could continuously reincarnate directly into my own descendants. This meant that regardless of whether the clan forced me into this or not, marrying, having children, and aggressively propagating my bloodline were fundamentally absolute, non-negotiable necessities for my long-term immortal cultivation and for successfully starting my next cycle of reincarnation. Since this was something I had to do anyway, the current situation was perfect. Not only was the clan handling the entire tedious selection of virtuous women for me, but I could also pocket a reward of 10 spiritual stones completely for free, along with subsequent fertility subsidies. If I were to foolishly refuse such a golden opportunity to rightfully obtain resources for free just for the sake of so-called youthful face, that would be extremely stupid. As the Prince of Jinan who had experienced 80 years of brutal political storms in my past life, I was long past the fragile age of being swayed by fleeting youthful impulsiveness. Seeing me be the first to step out and completely break the stalemate, the Deacon Elder's previously sunken, annoyed expression instantly cleared up. A heavy trace of profound approval and satisfaction appeared deep within his eyes. Good. Su Tian truly understands the big picture and knows exactly how to advance and retreat. He has not wasted the clan's investment and shall be credited with the first merit today. Young clan leader Su Hao, standing proudly beside the elder, felt completely comfortable at this moment, his face greatly boosted by my timely display. I bore his distinct brand. After all, I was the patrol guard he had personally promoted 3 years ago. When this stubborn group of collateral troublemakers was actively resisting family orders, my person had stood out without a single shred of hesitation to support the clan's grand picture. What did this mean to the observers? It loudly proved that he, Su Hao, possessed effective management skills and immense prestige among his followers. Elder, for the past 3 years, Su Tian has been diligently patrolling the outer spiritual fields, always remaining responsible and focused without making a single mistake. Su Hao spoke up at the exact right moment, looking down at the silent crowd below with a condescending, arrogant gaze, before turning to look at me with profound satisfaction. Now he has also considered the clan's overall situation, setting an excellent example for everyone else. This reward of 10 low-grade spiritual stones should rightfully go to him, and it is also for others to clearly see that our clan will never mistreat those who understand the rules and listen to arrangements. The young clan leader is absolutely right. The Deacon Elder nodded in complete agreement. With a casual wave of his long sleeve, a small cloth bag containing 10 low-grade spiritual stones flew through the air and landed steadily in my waiting hand. Many thanks to the elder and the young clan leader for the generous reward, I said smoothly, properly tucking the heavy bag of spiritual stones into my robes before quietly retreating to the side. I didn't bother to look back at the complicated, bitter gazes of my peers around me. With me acting as the decisive person to take the lead and violently tear open a breach in their collective resistance, coupled with the fatal immediate threat of having their monthly stipends permanently suspended, the remaining collateral descendants broke. Even if they were deeply unwilling in their young hearts, they saw their originally tense psychological defenses collapse completely, exactly like a fragile dam breaking under a massive tidal wave. In the face of cruel, unyielding reality, stubborn dignity could not be eaten as a meal after all. Half an hour later, the youths who finally recognized the reality of their situation could only bow their heads one after another in bitter defeat, pressing their ink-stained fingerprints onto the official roster and accepting the mortal women assigned to them by the clan.